the first of a series of three events dedicated to a new EU initiative called NaturAfrica. So we have one today on with three testimonies from the ground, and tomorrow we will have three from in French, and Monday we have the official launch by the Director General of my directorate in the European Commission. So my name is Philippe Maillot. I have the honor to moderate this session and to present briefly the concept of NaturAfrica today. So what is NaturAfrica? It's not something very new, actually, even if we have put a new name. It's just the fact that we realize, like many people, that anyway, but it's really the mantra that due to the last crisis, clearly the planet is supporting prosperity, is supporting peace, is supporting the life of people. And this is not new for us here in this arena, but you can believe me, in a development agency like my institution, sometimes it is a quite new, a new point of view. And the fact that last year our President von der Leyen, no, 2 years now, times is running, launched the Green Deal. That's something that is really a change. So what is the NaturAfrica? The NaturAfrica is really the idea that we don't have to work at the level of the protected area, but at the level of bigger landscapes. And in those bigger landscapes, we must do conservation on one side, but we must, more importantly, do development for local communities. And that's really I remember 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we were accompanying the local communities around the protected areas, but it was not an integrated management. No, the idea is really to have something much more integrated. So let's take an example. It's much clear. So here we are in the northern of Cameroon, a big complex where we have four national parks here, plus a series of other protected areas, hunting zones in this case. But we can see so many pressures we have here. We have agricultural encroachments. We have transhumants coming to the national park. We have a lot of conflicts. Also, in this case, we have it's linked to Boko Haram, and so and here we have the cotton front coming there. So it means that this area, if we manage only the protected areas, of course, in a few years, all the protected areas will be encroached by herders or by agricultors. So that's really why we need to integrate this activity in the big landscape. And what we plan to do, because this program will start, it was adopted in the first committee Friday, so it was a good surprise. Of course, we need to continue activities of conservation in the protected areas, in the hunting zones, so anti-poaching, ecological monitoring, research, sustainable finance, and so on. But we need to push a lot of technical activities around the protected areas, sustainable agriculture, rangeland management, energy, infrastructure, education even. But what is probably the most important layer in this landscape approach is really this box. How do we improve the governance at the landscape level? Because we have many different stakeholders with many different interests, and so some will win of this approach, some will lose. So how do we deal with that? And so the governance must be, of course, inclusive. All the stakeholders, starting maybe by the most influential partner. Sometimes there are traditional chiefs, sometimes it can be the state, it can be a private partner. So we must identify the main stakeholders. Of course, work a lot with women, youth, and indigenous people. We need also to have contracts between the different stakeholders, but also to respect the contract. And sometimes we all, NGOs and different partners, have contracts between different stakeholders, but who is really respecting, at the end of the day, the contract, and that's it. And now this year, another example in West Africa. Here's the map of all the activities that we have, that we are planning. We are planning to support in the next 7 years. So this NaturAfrica initiative, that's really the fact that all the delegations of EU will work with national governments, with local communities, with private sectors, with civil society to improve the management at this landscape level. And you can see two colors, but here it's not really contrasted, with some national programs like Salonga in Congo, or even here, it's transnational sometimes. But we have also big transboundary landscapes. And this is where also the governance layer is more important because you must work with different states. So I'm not longer today because it's just I want to give some testimonies today. And so we will have three test cases. One from Mali, so Suzanne Canet. She will start. Another one from Chad, and the last one from Ghana. And I don't know where's our colleague from Ghana. Sorry, I didn't know you before the session. So, okay. So now I will give the floor to Suzanne. Technician, can you put Suzanne Canet on the ground, on the screen? Suzanne, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you. I'm just...
I will change. And Suzanne, you can tell me when I have to change the slide. I think we have a problem now. Suzanne, maybe you can switch off your camera in this case. You say hello to everybody and then you switch off your camera.
Hello?
Hello. Your connection is really bad. Huh?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but maybe the best is... Can you just say hello, because the image is not really good? And then we can, if you can switch off your camera, we can pass the slides from here.
Grassland landscapes in the south. And there are little patches of small waterholes with patches of thicket forest surrounding them in the north, and some areas of forest in the south. There's also a great diversity of people. They're mostly pastoralists in the north, and some agriculture in the south, and agro-pastoral type livelihoods. And many different ethnicities and clans actually share this area. So the question in 2003 was, how have these elephants survived? They're an internationally important population, and they undertake the longest and most unusual circular migration of all elephants. And before 2012, there was about 500 of them. This shows the migration route as identified by the GPS collar data. We've zoomed in now, and you can see the Niger River bending round there to the north, the inner delta of the Niger to the west, and the Bandiagara escarpment to the southwest there. And they're covering a vast area, about the size of Belgium and Luxembourg combined. And the first thing that strikes you is that there's areas where they concentrate most of their time, and they move between these areas very rapidly. And by looking at what was happening in these areas, we could understand how they were finding their water, food, refuge, and avoiding human activity. And each of these concentration areas, there's a little story associated with it, but we don't have time now. This slide shows basically why they are where they are. This is the elephant migration route in green, shown in relation to settlements, human settlements, and you can see they're actually trying to avoid human activity. And of course, the main threat to these elephants is the incremental encroachment of humans into their habitats. Now, in 2006, we understood the migration, but the question was, what on earth could be done? We're a tiny project. This was a vast area. It was clear we needed to understand more about the human that live in this area and how they saw the elephants. So we did some community engagement activities. Here we show some workshops with community leaders, showing them our results, asking what they thought, asking how they live with elephants and what perceptions were. And very common sentiments were expressed, these key attitudes. The first was they didn't want elephants to disappear because it would mean that the environment was no longer good for human life. They understood this idea of elephants as being an indicator of a relatively healthy, intact, resilient ecosystem. The second was that they were very aware that human activity must respect biophysical limits, because if it overstepped those limits, then that ecosystems would degrade and be no longer able to support life. And yet, when you look at this area, there's an awful lot of degradation, reduction, fragmentation of landscape ecosystem resilience and productivity. So what was happening? We needed to understand more. And so conducted socioeconomic surveys, first of all at Lake Banzena, because this was the late dry season water, so vital for elephants. It's the only place that elephants could find water at the end of the dry season. So this was our top priority. And these studies revealed key findings that came as quite some surprise. The first was the degree of resource exploitation by outside commercial interests coming from urban areas, the river towns of the Niger, but also much further afield in the rest of Mali and adjacent countries. We found that 96% of the cattle using the lake actually belonged to distant, wealthy urbanites, commercial herders. They didn't belong to local people at all. And the third key thing was that while individual ethnicities had systems to manage natural resources, they were very reluctant to respect those systems of another ethnicity. So effectively, you had a tragedy of the commons. So we convened the local communities, local stakeholders together to share these results and to discuss them, to see if they thought these were accurate, and to discuss them in the context of their own lives and their relationship with elephants. And very rapidly, they could reach a kind of a unity, a common perception of the problem. And that created a unity among them. And then you could say, well, what needs to be done about this? And they said, well, we need systems that everybody respects. So we set up, so this is the beginning of this model of what we call elephant-centered community-based natural resource management. There was an elected management committee of elders who established the plans and the rules of resource use and identifying the elephant areas and habitats and preventing their degradation and overexploitation. This was possible because of decentralization legislation, which places natural resources under the control of local communities. They also the communities elected teams of young eco-guards, unarmed, who patrolled to ensure compliance with the rules. So the first thing they did was set aside a big protected area of pasture, 90,000 hectares. They protected them with fire breaks, and so they had this big area of protected pasture. The advantages of this was that they had pasture at the end of the dry season, close by. They could sell hay, grazing access rights, and they could charge per head of livestock for access to water. Their livestock was worth 50% more, it was healthier, gave more milk and produced more young. And the revenue was shared equally between management committee, the eco-guards and the women. Also protected forests. Here we can compare two forests, similar forests, one with resource management systems and on the right-hand side and one without, and suffering of heavy abusive cutting. And once there's more natural resources available, there's more scope for income generating activities. And these are very much the women who take the lead on these. They're very good at this. We've got them collecting burgu here, selling acacia pods, collecting gum arabic, and doing these leather handicrafts. This was working very well, and many other communities were asking for help to do the same thing. And I honestly think that without the conflict, we'd have this functioning over the whole of the elephant range by now, and sustainably without a lot of input from us. But in 2012, the area just became lawless overnight. Government fled, and it was full of armed groups, heavily armed, and poaching began for the first time. great upheaval. So we convened a community meeting of 4 days so that people could discuss the problems they were having. Their biggest problem was they could not get grain because supply trucks were being hijacked. And so we helped them distribute grain by donkey cart. They were also concerned about their young men joining the armed group, and we were concerned about elephants. So community leaders issued edicts, said anyone who kills elephants is a thief because they're stealing from the local people. We established a vigilance network of eco-guards, 520 across the elephant range to detect poaching and discover the perpetrators. None of these joined the armed groups, even though armed groups were giving $30 to $50 a day, because they said we were just paying small recognition payments, and they said that this was a more noble occupation that gave them local status and, of course, was also safer. But in 2015, the epicenter of the conflict descended from the north to the center of Mali, and poaching escalated. And it was clear we needed some kind of armed enforcement. So over the next 2 years, we worked with government. It was very difficult working with the government at this time, but eventually managed to create an anti-poaching response from scratch, working with the military, with the wildlife division, all together. What was key was the training given by Chengeta Wildlife. They were particularly important, and I particularly wanted the kind of training that was very community-centered. So it was about a synergy where the anti-poaching unit actually supported local communities, and local communities were helping with intelligence and information, and that this kind of synthesis of information was helped to guide the approach and tactics of the anti-poaching unit. So this is the history of poaching. The first 3 years, local community structures managed to contain poaching. Then, as the security decreased, poaching escalated. Those 2 years of high poaching levels as we were trying to get the anti-poaching unit functional. In February 2017, it became fully functional, and since then, poaching has been more or less contained. At this time, 2017, they were the only enforcement group that was able to move and operate throughout this area. All other military were either in their bases or just parts of convoys traveling along the roads. We knew that this support would need additional support to really work well, and so since 2011 have been working with the government to designate a new protected area based on a biosphere reserve model. So under this model, the key core areas for elephants are protected, but the vast majority of this area comes under the multi-use areas come under the community natural resource management agreement. So the communities themselves are establishing and policing these, and the advantage of this is that the rangers can have a legal mandate to support local communities in the enforcement of their systems. Big challenge has emerged last year with the arrival of artisanal gold prospecting. This is not led by local communities. These are outsiders, and it's very much associated with arms dealing. They're using mercury and cyanide, and also the meager water resources of these small water holes, which are being ferried backwards and forwards in jerry cans, sold for $5 a jerry can, something local people can't afford at all. So this is a really big new challenge that we're dealing with now. So just to try and sum up a little, this approach is started with the decentralization legislation, which provide the enabling framework for a locally adapted system of governance of natural resource management, and then that in turn created more needs which were responded to by government, the anti-poaching unit, and the protected area legislation. So these two levels are mutually reinforcing themselves. Key takeaways from this. The first is that this notion of multiple synergistic benefits. What started as an elephant conservation project to enable human-elephant peaceful coexistence has been shown to improve livelihoods and reduce poverty. It has also provided occupations for youth in regenerating natural resources, and this is something that's so key for the whole of this Sahelian band. You've got a big area of degraded, decreasingly unproductive ecosystems, reduced resilience to environmental change, and at the same time, as you have these unemployed youth, nothing to do, thinking about emigrating, fleeing to the cities. These two could be put together to regenerate these ecosystems. And it's also found that this improves social cohesion because the communities have to come together to realize these benefits. The other key takeaway is the dual response to anti-poaching and trafficking, and how the law enforcement and the community side of things have to really mutually reinforce each other to be effective. And this really came about because right at the beginning we didn't have a very clear plan of exactly how we were going to achieve this elephant conservation. But by looking at the whole human natural ecosystem as a complex system and trying to shift key relationships, understanding the ecology first and human dimensions as embedded within that ecology, you're able to identify leverage points for action. And this is explained in more detail in this article in Environment, in Sustainability, Environment magazine, Science and Policy for Sustainable Development. And that this describes this approach in more detail and what lessons we can learn for it. So it just leaves me to thank all our partners and supporters, and to thank you all for giving us this opportunity to share our experience, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan. Maybe after that there will be a short discussion with some questions, but we have 3 presentations, so we are a bit taken by the time. But really, we are at the EU. We are very proud to support this one among other donors, and we hope that we will continue for a long time. Now we will listen to a video message from Naftali Honig from African Parks. He is manager of the Zakuma, the Grand Zakuma in Chad. Unfortunately, or fortunately, because his job is on the field today. So no, he's maybe in N'Djamena, but he prefers anyway to register something. So I will ask to the technician to launch a small film on the role of communities in the Zakuma National Park.
Hello, my name is Naftali Honig, and I am the General Manager of the Greater Zakuma Ecosystem, working for African Parks in Republic of Chad. And African Parks has been working here in Chad and Zakuma for more than a decade now. And as part of our model is to enter into long-term management agreements with governments like the Republic of Chad, where we take on 100% responsibility for the management of protected areas. So that's the sustainable development of communities, that's the wildlife management, the law enforcement, and of course the financial aspects as well, and even revenue generation. So yeah, our goal, in places like Zakuma is to unlock all of the ecological, social, and economic value that are inside of these wild areas, so that we can achieve tangible benefits for the communities that live around protected areas like Zakuma and Senyaka Mania, and really restore the wildlife of these incredible areas. So yeah, the Greater Zakuma ecosystem is comprised of Zakuma National Park and the Senyaka Mania Wildlife Reserve, and together they form this magnificent landscape, which is actually a functional landscape as animals. It's at the extremes of animals' ability to move between the two, but they do. and there is a connectivity of the landscape, which is really amazing. It's quite a sparsely populated area, but it's in an absolutely stunning part of the world, a beautiful part of Chad, and it has really made us think a lot about how we can work together with the local communities, not just directly around the protected areas, but in this sort of interstitial space that's in between those two protected areas. And at the end of the day, conservation is a land use choice, and so what we are aiming for here is to make it the most favorable land use choice for the communities that are living around Senyaka, Minya, and Zakuma, and in between. So, we don't really use the word periphery or peripheral communities as much anymore, because we don't really see it as parks are here and communities are on the outside in this periphery. We see it as very participatory, and that the communities are not peripheral to anything that we're doing, but very much a part of what we're doing, and choosing conservation as that preferred form of land use. So, as I mentioned, in early 2021, we were able to celebrate 5 years of no elephant poaching here, and that's really remarkable, considering that a decade ago things were substantially different, and in the decade previous things were even more challenging. With the war in Darfur going on to our east, there was a very heavy pressure of insecurity on this part of Chad, and that led to all sorts of problems with communities suffering from instability and insecurity, and of course wildlife suffered just the same. And it really is a reminder. I mean, seeing the situation in Zakuma today is a fantastic reminder of how important stability is, geopolitical stability is, as a foundation for both conservation and sustainable development. Without that foundation, you can't really, without that security, you can't have safe places, and safe places, that means safety for human beings, that means safety for wild animals. So they're very much interlinked. And the success of Zakuma over the years has led to a burgeoning of wildlife, and now this global recognition as a unique wildlife tourist destination. And as we see this success, we actually see the expansion of wildlife moving outside the national park. So, it's really amazing to see the product of this increased stability, and now seeing the wildlife returning to these patterns of vast movement outside the national park, especially in the wet season. Zakuma is very water centric. The story of Zakuma revolves around water. In the dry season, all the animals come because you have the confluence of a number of rivers. The last bits of water are inside Zakuma National Park, so it's the natural place for wildlife to congregate in the dry season. But in the wet season, it expands out, and you have Tiang and hartebeest going far to the north, and you have all sorts of different movements of elephants, but especially out to the west towards Senyaka Mania, you have elephant movements going sometimes more than 100 kilometers. And it's really remarkable as security sets back in this part of Chad. You start to see that coming back to life in ways that were really threatened, especially for elephants more than anything, really threatened by insecurity. So yeah, this is really where the term the greater Zakuma ecosystem comes into play. It's looking at Zakuma not just as a single national park, but on that landscape level. And in addition to the elephants moving far outside of Zakuma, you also we have like other far-ranging species. A lion just the other day walked more than 30 kilometers outside of the Zakuma park boundary to Auk. So it's really amazing to see. And we're going to give a boost to animals that might take a bit longer to expand their ranges on this ecosystem level. We're going to give a boost to that next year with a large-scale translocation of wildlife from Zakuma to Senyaka Mania. So we're all quite excited about that. And the landscape is a sparsely populated landscape. There's a very low density of agricultural communities, and presence of nomads, nomadic pastoralist communities. Traditional livelihoods in this area revolve broadly around farming, fishing, and in the case of those nomadic communities, transhuman pastoralism. And Zakuma National Park itself, because it was created in 1963, there's a pretty wide recognition of its importance. It's important to local communities. And the aim, again, is really that communities have a sense of ownership of the greater Zakuma ecosystem, and that conservation is the preferred form of land use. So when we think about the impact that we have on this part of the world, that's what we want to achieve. That's how we kind of see it within our vision. And that begins with engagement with key leadership and stakeholders, getting the buy-in of high-level authorities to the greater Zakuma ecosystem and providing platforms that are always there. So just a permanent kind of cycle of platforms that serve as opportunities to allow active participation of communities and other stakeholders. We try to have conservation dividends, we call them, like tangible benefits that contribute to the trust and engagement of communities and stakeholders, that are within the sort of conservation world, and also schools. Even another conservation dividend example might be not just schools, but a medical evacuation or something to that effect. In these remote communities, that's very important to people. And land use management and planning, an efficient, adaptive, integrated management of land use across the greater Zakuma ecosystem is what gives us the ability. It allows for like a resilient balance between conservation objectives and sustainable development of human activities across the landscape. Obviously, we always look at education as well, and that kind of fits into many different categories of education. But there are sort of general education and just building out literacy, and it helps in terms of working together with people on abstract concepts and land use planning and all of that, and understanding sustainable development in a more abstract sense. So general education is quite important, including adult education. Family planning is quite important within our education programs, and then conservation education and skills, because the ability of communities to work within the conservation environment. I mean, we have oftentimes we generally have over 250 staff. Sometimes in dry season we'll be employing many more people as well, and especially with the tourism season and various other types of employment. So all that together, conservation skills are also just an extremely important area of education that we want to work on. And we work together with communities to develop enterprise. So sustainable forestry, we want to work more on sustainable fisheries, especially on the landscape level, because the park itself is such a good repository for fish, that being able to work on sustainable fisheries projects is going to be wonderful. And then we work also on guaranteed markets. So that's basically the goods and services that are mutually beneficial to communities and also to the greater Zakuma ecosystem. So a market that, for example, is something that we need, and we're going to purchase it no matter what, and then guaranteeing that market to communities that live around the park is just a fantastic way of tying ourselves together and economically with local communities. And beyond sort of transactional benefits, to amplify those conservation dividends, we work within the framework of the Rwandan concept of umuganda. In Chad, we call it Dari Nadif. And the staff here in Zakuma came up with that. It means my clean country in Chadian Arabic. And it's a really great effort to support organic. It's a framework in which we can support these organic efforts that exist within communities, to make sure that our support is aligned with. Of course, it's going to be aligned with conservation goals, but to make sure that our support is also aligned with the goals of communities and what they require. So if we're going to build a school together, we want to make sure that that's. Or for example, another one we did recently is improving wet season access to a particular road that we provided a guaranteed market to. If we can do that as part of these, umuganda or Dari Nadif projects, working together with local communities, we think that's fantastic, and and there's so much potential to expand there. We do as many events like that as we can, but obviously, if we take the Rwandan example, we have lots of room to sort of multiply that throughout Chad. So, yeah. So nowadays we are multiplying our efforts, and everything that we're doing is taking place on a bit of a larger scale. If we look at the greater Zikuma ecosystem, since 2017, we've been managing Siniaka-Mania Wildlife Reserve as well. So since 2017, African Parks has been working at a greater magnitude, and in a direct sense, managing 2 protected areas rather than 1. And Siniaka is in a phase of growth, so that means there's more employees, more day workers, more local contractors, more guaranteed markets, and by extension, a greater number of families that are reached by conservation. So that more than balances the challenge, like the challenges that do exist, like human-wildlife conflict or land management issues. But we obviously work together to face those challenges. We've collared more animals, and we can react preemptively to human-wildlife conflict. We're expanding our VHF network to the Gera Highlands west of Zikuma, working together with local communities, providing rangers with improved communications, of course, but simultaneously that expands our reach to communities. So with the community radio network they have, that we have all together, the communities can radio in from, and we can provide them with radios and radio in information, again, to build that foundation of security, but also to communicate on other projects that we might have together, and yeah, things that we do together, other ways that we are tied together, like if we operate airstrips in many places outside of the national parks, and oftentimes a community will maintain those airstrips. So being able to communicate like that on a wider scale is fantastic. Even if it is an order of magnitude greater space within Chad. So we're not conducting a development exercise here in parallel to a conservation exercise. It's that in between the 2 protected areas, Zikuma and Siniaka-Mania, there's a third space where conservation is a promising form of land use. And, we seek, sustainability in the transhumance and the fishing practices and the various provisioning ecosystem services that this huge ecosystem can provide. And our goal is to accompany the local population through this sustainable land use in such a way that promotes healthy wildlife corridors, real, meaningful, healthy wildlife corridors that simultaneously, help that wildlife, but also better the lives of some of the most remote communities in Chad.
Thank you, Naftali. So it was a very interesting, very different model than the previous one. And in an old park, 63, not so old because I was born the same year, so it's a young national park. And now we will have a third presentation with a completely different model. And so finally we have the in-person presence of Mabel. So, and you know the meaning in French, huh? So I hope that it will.
It means the same thing. Okay, thank you, everyone. The best always comes last, so so it's good to be the last person to present and be in person. My name is Mabel Agba. I represent NOE. NOE is a not-for-profit organization based in France, but with program offices across the world. Our core mission is to safeguard biodiversity, and we run several programs in West Africa, where Ghana is. Our program is focused on green value chain development and community-based biodiversity conservation. And so today, I'm going to tell you more about a model that we use called the CRIMA. So what is CRIMA? CRIMA actually is a policy framework that was promulgated by the government of Ghana, which allows decentralized management of natural resources where local communities are able to organize themselves and to take decisions around the management of their natural resources. For the CRIMA to run, the communities have to demarcate a boundary around the area where they want to conserve. And all the communities that fall within that boundary are called the CRIMA. each community forms what we call Community Resource Management Committee. And out of those committees, they all have representatives who come together to form a body called CRIMA Executive Committee. And the CRIMA actually is an acronym which simply means Community Resource Management Area. So just to make it clear. And this body acts as the overall governance body that takes decision around the management of natural resources and serves as an entry point for stakeholders who want to engage the communities and take development actions within this environment. Now the CRIMA, when they form this kind of structure, now develop their own constitution with their rules, their bylaws, and this bylaw has to be gazetted by the district assembly, which is the local government authority that operates within the area. Now, when they do this, they also now have to apply for a devolution certificate, which is given by the government, which actually gives them the right and authority to manage their natural resources, which means that they can take their own decision with the support of government, of course, to manage the resources. Now, this whole policy framework came as a result of the government's intent to ensure that local communities have this kind of collaborative resources management with park managers to ensure that there is an integrated and sectoral approach in terms of management of resources where the communities are not seen as a problem, but rather as a solution to the management of resources. So within the program that we run in Ghana, there are about 45 different CRIMAs in the whole of Ghana. 25 are well established and functioning, and 20 are currently in the different stages of development, so they are in the process of development. Out of these 45 CRIMAs, we support 12 of them in Ghana. And so we work in the, so this is the map of Ghana, and currently we work here in the southwestern part of Ghana. We also work somewhere around the southeastern part of Ghana in Atiwa Forest, here, Ankasa Forest, and then we also work in the Western Wildlife Corridor that connects the Nazinga Forest, Burkina Faso, and Ghana. But today I'm going to focus our project on one landscape, which is called the Mole landscape here. And we work, NOWI actually runs in such a way that we work with local NGOs that are already on the ground supporting these CRIMA structures. And so we work with Arusha, Ghana at the eastern fringe of the Mole National Park. And then we also work with North Coast, Ghana at the western fringe of the Mole National Park. And we support shea butter value chain, beekeeping around those, that landscape. So how does our approach actually leverage on this CRIMA governance structure? NOWI runs a program that looks at how biodiversity conservation and green value chain development are mutually reinforcing. So here, in terms of the development of the value chain, the approach that we look at is that before the value chain is established, we have to do feasibility study to look at the social, economic issues, the actors around the value chains, the indigenous knowledge, what we can do to ensure that it's not kind of people coming to solve the problem of poor people, but rather ensuring that those local people, the project that we are running is meeting the needs of those local people, and they are the custodians of their own traditional knowledge. So having done the assessment of the value chain and knowing all the issues around it, we now kind of link the producer groups that are within the landscape with private sector partners that support the production of local businesses and local enterprises. So here in the Mole landscape, we work with a private business called Savannah Fruit Company, working on the shea butter. We also work with another private business called Costa Canning that supports the development of beeswax, and we also provide support honey. But currently, the groups themselves work on the bee value chain and produce the honey themselves, package it. So we provide technical capacity building. This private sector that we connect with the value chain actors do transfer of skills, transfer of knowledge, and then they also provide other support systems that the producer groups require. Then here within the CRIMA governance structure where there is biodiversity conservation, we build the capacity of the local people, which is called the CRIMA, so that they themselves can form their own patrols and do their own patrol activities. They do their reforestation actions and any other thing that they want to do. We also support them to develop management plans which have restoration actions, and they have annual action plan. The CRIMA also, because they organize themselves, they are also able to organize their own general assembly, which serves as a means of them to give feedback and also provide accountability for their own members as to how things are running within the CRIMA. Now, because the private business actually source commodity from the area and the local communities are the one protecting it, how then do they benefit also from the businesses that are sourcing commodity from them? And so what we do is to use this model called the conservation agreement. This conservation agreement binds the local people and the private business in such a way that the private business is able to contribute part of its profit towards the conservation of the local community, so that they are not just taken away from them, but they are also contributing towards the conservation of the resources. So that is what we call the conservation agreement. And the private business, apart from the conservation agreement, also signs a purchase agreement with the local producers. So with all these, what are the results that we can see on the ground, and how does this improve the livelihood of the people? So currently, using the CRIMA approach within the Mole landscape, based on the demarcations that we have done, out of 5 CRIMAs that we support, we have 160,000 hectares of forest that are currently being managed within this landscape. And then we have 21,000 seedlings that have been planted in agroforestry and degraded areas since 2018, when our project started in Ghana. We are supporting 17 communities, out of which 232 persons, of which 25% have been empowered to lead their own conservation actions and do what they are supposed to do. Then we also support 75 patrollers that have been trained with different equipment to be able to do biodiversity monitoring and know the species involvement, what is happening, the trends that are in terms of biodiversity conservation. And as I said, the other actions that support, so we have signed 5 conservation agreements with private sector, Savannah Fruit Company, out of which every year, kind of at least 1,000 euros annually is generated in this conservation agreement. A trust fund has been built for the entire Mole landscape, because we are looking at a landscape approach, not just a project approach. So the conservation fund is set aside that there can be support for all conservation action and development that happen within the landscape. So all actors that work there, if you want to contribute to support, you are welcome to do so. And just to mention that just the sheer value chain alone from 2018 till now contributed about 31,090 Ghana cedis into the conservation fund. And like I mentioned, the development of the value chain requires the construction of processing centers. So we built one huge ultra-modern shea butter processing center that can hire about 200 people and can produce 1 metric ton of shea butter a day. We also supply, we construct warehouses. We have constructed about 11 warehouses in the Mole landscape. And one thing that I can mention, even though I haven't gotten there, but let me mention it here, is that as part of the indirect result from this project, we had women telling us that because we have constructed these warehouses, now the living spaces where they sleep now, because they were afraid that people will steal their nuts, now because these warehouses are there, they no longer have to keep those bags of nuts in their bedroom, but they have a place to keep it, and now they have spaces in their room, which we think that is really important in terms of improving the quality of the lives of the people. And as I said, we build the capacity of the people. So as you see that picture here, we provide them with tricycles, because the women have to travel long distances to collect the nuts. By giving them this kind of technology, remove that barrier, which otherwise would not help them to be able to collect more nuts. But now, because of this, they're able to collect a lot of nuts. The BWAS, we provide all this technology. Yep. And then, like I said, the whole model generates employment. And so currently, we are able to support over 1,000 people within the landscape with improved livelihood. We have increased income. So this figure that you see here, just between 2018 and 2020, we have generated about 34,567 euros of profits for these women. That is quite slow, but it's something to start with. And there has been improved condition, as I mentioned already. The other thing we also do to ensure that the environmental impact and then the health impact are reduced is to valorize the waste that are generated from the production of shea butter. And so they now make briquettes out of this waste, which goes back into the production so that they don't have to collect a lot of woods to produce the shea nuts, the shea butter. Now, it sounds all good, but usually, like, you wouldn't say there are some kind of challenges that we are still facing that we think that can be done. The policy framework that I mentioned is just an intent. So it requires an act or a legislative instrument that will have to back it so that it gives it a more legal backing. Then also we realize that there is less support from government also because of funding issues. The other thing that we have also identified as a challenge is high dependency of the creamers on donor funding. But with the conservation agreement model that we have adopted, we are looking forward. We see this as a means to be able to support the challenge. Then the other thing we see is a challenge in terms of, this is my way of spelling illiteracy. Forgive me about that. So this is in terms of, we have challenge in terms of illiteracy and then capacity gaps, but we are still working on that, providing continuous support and coaching. And then also in terms of gender, you saw that for the value chains, we have a lot of women that are involved because we have been able to remove some of the barriers that we otherwise know. But with the creamer model itself, we are still kind of struggling to have a lot of women to participate in terms of leadership role. But we are employing what we call the affirmative action to ensure that, so what are the prospects that we see? We are doing a lot of advocacy to ensure that government gives a legal backing to the policy that they have promulgated. And then we are also ensuring doing the promotion of the conservation agreement in all the other landscapes where we are working. And then we are continually providing the capacity building and all that. So thank you so much.
You have a lot of fans, huh? In the the tifosi. No. Thank you, Willy. I don't know the time exactly and when we have to leave. Probably we have 2-3 minutes, not more. Unfortunately, maybe it's even time to conclude. I'm sorry, but you have the coordinates of all the speakers. We have a few minutes or not, Roxana? I don't know, but maybe not. We have 5 minutes, so we can take a few questions. Let's say 2 questions, if you don't mind. So I see one here. And
hello, I'm Susan Moore from BirdLife International. I'm interested to hear how the marine themes will be elaborated for the new project. Thank you.
okay, the second question is there. No?
Thank you. Hello, I am Andres from Así Conserva Chile. My question is how, in the protected area, how we try the transhumansons, how we working in that.
Okay, maybe the transhumans, Susan or Naftali can maybe answer remotely. The first question probably it's to me because it's in the frame of the big landscape. Of course, landscape means also seascapes, and so we are now. So you must know that we are in the programming phase of the next 7 years in the EU funding. And in the African countries, around 30 countries out of 45 having in our responsible, of DGs responsible of those one, the sub-Saharan Africa, 30 out of 45 have put biodiversity at the center of the cooperation, which is completely new. In the previous period, it was 4. We had 4 countries. Now we have 30 countries. And 15, I guess, have also put coastal and marine issues. For example, all the Indian Ocean, from Somalia to Mozambique, Madagascar, so on, all those countries have put biodiversity, marine biodiversity and coastal diversity in the core business of the next 7 years. So it's really encouraging, and also in the Atlantic coast also, a bit less, I must say. And what we have also at the top of that is we have regional programs there also. So we have 2 bigs at the Atlantic part, so the Gulf of Guinea, but also the western part, and then a big one, a very big one that maybe we have to split in the Indian Ocean, and so it will be fully funded, definitely, and much more than in the past. So there is really a Copernican revolution. Yeah. And so the question for the transhumants, maybe I can ask Susan and or Naftali, maybe Susan on because you have transhumants.
Can you
Can you hear us?
Y- yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. What we try to do is empower the local communities to take decisions for themselves in sustainable resource management. And that includes for the commercial herders coming into their area, they're able to charge by the head for access to pasture and livestock. And that was working well before the conflict. It's more challenging now, but it's a model that did work. And in the paper I showed, it discusses a little more about how we were going to develop that model to understand more about the behavior of the commercial herds and the owners to be able to tailor, to adapt that method. But as a first kind of step, it was empowering local communities to actually charge, make arrangements for grazing access rights. So they would charge by the head for these cattle to use their pasture and their water and regulate numbers in that way and generate income for local communities.
Thank you, Susan. Indeed, this transhumance issue, it's very complex because they are moving, so it's difficult communities to contact. So unfortunately, it's time to leave. Tomorrow we have another session because it's a saga, NaturAfrica at the World Conservation Congress. Tomorrow it's in French. And then we have the official launch on Monday. We have produced, if you want, a leaflet that is available online because it's a paperless Congress, so I'm not authorized to distribute those ones. If you want some, I have some, but don't tell it to the organizers. And I would like really to thank the three panelists, really passionate, and they are the real heroes on the ground. So thank you, Susan. Thank you, Naftali. Thank you, Mabel. And I would like really a strong acclamation for all of you. Thank you. Next one. You are